some questions to make the panel even more interesting than it might normally be, just so that we can get it engaged. And Doug, take it away, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Rick.
You're welcome, man.
It's always a pleasure to be here supporting NATPE. And thank you all for coming out on this wonderful UN Clinton Global Initiative NATPE Day. I understand we have close to 1,000 people joining us online, so I'd like to welcome everybody online to this panel on connectivity. And obviously, you've all shown your support by connecting in with these 4 unbelievable panelists I have today that represent different facets of the industry. Just to give you a brief introductions, at the end is my good friend Anthony Batt from Catalyst. Catalyst, for some of you that may not know, is responsible for Punk'd, as well as the current show Spara, which is a Virgin Mobile project creating celebs in a time when it's all about celebrity and buzz. If you haven't checked out Spara, I invite you to do so. It's really some crazy stuff. To his right is also a good friend, Ian Schaefer. I think you're going to see a theme here with my friends in a second. Ian Schaefer from Deep Focus. Deep Focus is Pepsi's social media agency of record, working very closely with them on X Factor, and we'll hear more about X Factor and sort of what's happening as we go on here. They're also responsible for Mad Men Yourself on AMC and The Long Con on Epix, which I just learned about with our good friend William Shatner in terms of that project. To his right, Mark Unim at Wired Set. Mark was actually the first digital evangelist in the music business back in the day. I think if they would have listened to Mark, the labels probably would still be in business. But in any event, he's out there with a company called Wired Set, responsible for a product called Trender, which is probably the best listening tool in the industry in terms of what's happening out there across platforms and specifically in the world of television right now. And then lastly, to my left is Justin Baracus from Anomaly. Anomaly is probably one of the strongest independent agencies out there, although you're not independent anymore, are you?
Independently spirited.
That's what I meant.
That's right.
Entrepreneurs at the heart, owned by a holding company. And Anomaly is responsible for a Band of Ballers, which was produced for Converse, and the Emmy Award-winning Avec Eric, which is Eric Repair Show, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So needless to say, a great group of panelists, and I'm just going to jump right in here right now. Backstage in the corner room, our corner, we were talking a little bit about sort of this idea of connectivity and what is social entertainment. And we started to have a conversation around the connected consumer and this idea of a value proposition. And when you think about television in the early day, the proposition was, you give me your time and I give you free entertainment. Now the proposition is, you give me your time, you give me $200 for cable, I give you less entertainment that you got in the hour that you used to get, and I hit you with a lot of really bad commercials, several that are produced by agencies that we all know. So in this idea of connected platforms, from television to broadband to mobile to tablets, what is the value proposition? And Tony, if we can start with you, what's the value proposition that producers and distributors of content need to be offering to consumers in order to really get them connected with the content that they're putting out today?
Well, I mean, I think the producer needs to become way more curious about that socially connected audience. And the way right now, the way producers are, they sell their product to a distributor, and the distributor sort of relies on just the marketing. And I think that producers now need to kind of step more into that void and actually, since they're creating a program for the audience, they know that audience, they need to actually start having the curiosity and the creative sort of power to kind of communicate to that audience when the show goes in the series. And in fact, when it goes in the series, they should actually be listening, perhaps using one of the products here, to figure out how to actually better program the show or just better respond to the show. But right now, most television producers aren't thinking that way at all. I think very few, if any.
Ian, you do a lot of work with the networks and production companies. Mm-hmm. I mean, in that process, are they bringing you in during the season development as the writers are actually writing that season, or do you have a seat at the table to the point that you're able to map out your strategy on the scripted side, or on the unscripted? Obviously, that's a lot different. But
yeah, I mean, well, am I really loud, or is it?
All right. Really loud.
So Yeah, sorry. Like, this is Jesus, Kent. One of the things that we typically ask for is that. It rarely happens because the networks and the production companies are usually two different entities with, someone creates a show and owns the show. So it might be Sony Pictures that's actually producing the show and AMC that's running it, like in the case of Breaking Bad, for example. So it makes that really difficult, especially as there are tense negotiations between talent and distributor. We are now, though, getting involved with more either on the brand side, with brands getting involved in the production really early, or with the actual production and distribution companies being the same entity, where they actually own the production and we can get on set, for example, capture assets. We're not actually enhancing, or I should say even affecting the content of the series itself, but rather the ancillary content. But in that regard, from a consumer standpoint or a viewer standpoint, it's kind of the same. I mean, when people watch or fall in love with a show as a brand, they expect that brand or that show is going to have other experiences alongside of it. So whether that's a digital extension, whether that's original content that's only available online, whether that's a spin-off, like whatever these are, that still makes up the brand of that show. And in theory, that's what advertisers are buying, but really, in reality, what they're buying is ratings. And that kind of makes it a little more difficult for us in a world where we're trying to distract people from something that they're probably distracted doing into getting them to pay attention to something else on a television screen.
Right.
And until we liberate kind of where that content is and incorporate all of that content, all those content viewing experiences across all the devices, then we'll be in a better place. But for now, it's the marketing and production of it is still really fragmented, but the sales is still kind of centralized around the view on television, which presents issues, as you can imagine.
And I think that points of attention across different devices is totally the challenge. I love the way talent has jumped right in. So whether it's Jimmy Fallon taping a show in the afternoon and then going home and watching it himself and live blogging or live tweeting it as it's happening, and I think Howard Stern may have even done that before him, but talent has definitely jumped into the mix, sometimes with and without the premeditated view. And then you have, competitive reality shows like The Voice and other ones who are deeply baking in some of that second screen behavior. And what I love about the second screen behavior, and that's kind of what we measure, the levels of engagement around television, is that it's unique to you and your graph. So, the first screen's playing out, and I like to say the massive passives are watching that, and they're not at all engaged in their devices, but you can sit in that traditional television living room, and the two kids could be having completely different user experiences with their friends and lighting up their graph, which then ends up being engaged earned media, which hopefully triggers awareness and back to the first screen and the challenge that you do. And that's a hopefully, I think it's comparing apples to rocks right now. But that there is an engaged audience, and whether they're more premeditated to view the next week because they were deeper into that is, where it starts to get interesting.
I feel compelled to keep the sequence going.
Please, go right ahead.
You. But I think one of the things that's interesting from a content perspective is, and it feels like there's a gap between the two. There's the storyline that's playing out on screen, on television, what have you, but then there's a whole social simulcast of that storyline playing that the community owns. And sometimes those things, there's a huge gap between those two stories that are unfolding. And that engagement factor, that value proposition really lies in being able to connect those two and offer that consumer something that they are going to feel is beneficial to either that particular content and for the brand, some element that's going to allow them to harness all that energy into some productive end like a transaction or some other type of experience.
I will say what is happening though is like you've got a new breed of storytellers that are wanting to incorporate multiple screens into the story, and that new breed generation, whatever you want to call it, is going to have a significant impact on the future auteurs. And how they tell their stories, and it's going to change the way we market the stuff. It's going to change the way we consume the stuff, and it's going to change the way we decide on which of that stuff to fall in love with.
Yeah, I would say if you remove the TV component from it, the storyteller is already doing that with the web, social graph.
Yes.
It's when you add the TV component to it, it becomes difficult to actually.
A different product almost.
Yeah.
Well, and that listening thing that you're both hitting on can really inform production. And maybe, we're always talking about how it maps to advertising and gross ratings points, but also if you're listening effectively, you can start to understand which characters and plot lines have resonance and where maybe to spend more production time or what you're creating.
But the quick solution for the TV side is like we make TV shows is there's no dollar for it. So if someone just said, hey, we want you to have a really good social programming alongside your TV show, and here's the money to do so, then we would know we'd spend it appropriately. But right now, when we come up to ask for it, MTV's like, we're going to do this component. The production company says, well, we don't want to take a lower fee, and we don't want to do it, but we don't want to spend to do it, but we really do think it's warranted. So if brands or anyone came in and said, we want to buy this programming and you make it, the producer makes it, then they'll do it.
So there is that gap in the economic model. I think
there's no one
talking about
eating that right now.
We were talking about the X Factor last night, where literally it felt like there was a huge missed opportunity in that social engagement on behalf of the X Factor brand and being able to aggregate, that audience around their social properties. There's a ton of activity there, but it does seem that that integration between what was happening, in the broadcast and the characters themselves would lend itself beautifully, to building that social audience. But unless there's an actual economic model there that incentivizes both the producer, and the distributor to create that audience, to your point, it doesn't feel like it's actually going to happen.
Right. I think that's the brand opportunity. I mean, to create more engaging and more dialed in type of advertising.
And brands are doing that already. I mean, they have their Facebook pages, they're buying tweets, right? I mean, Deep Focus, you guys are very involved with brands developing social media strategies. My question around that, Tony, to your point is, is it really the networks that right now are holding back this wave? Because what they are so addicted to their 30-second, 60-second, 15-second spots and the awareness that it creates, and they know how to monetize that air, right? And as long as they continue to churn and burn those hours 7 nights a week between prime time, right? They're making their number. And like the record industry, their head is in the sand saying, you know what, not on my clock. But the minute that Apple puts a television monitor in your living room, or the minute that Samsung or LG's smart TVs take root to the consumer, and we have a different behavior in terms of the way we lean back and view our content, don't we think that all of that really is going to shift quickly to the point that brands are going to get on that social media television bandwagon?
I think so. You said it. Yes, they will. I mean, again, the consumer behavior is there. It's really, networks are just doing like good TV websites now, I think, right? I mean,
yeah.
But that
Deep Focus is developing.
But the web came out,
we don't even do that anymore,
right?
Yeah,
so I think there's a lag for them to really jump in. And I think that when a television producer or creator really creates a narrative-rich dialogue that is actually taking place on the social web and then sort of appearing back in the television, then you will actually sort of complete the loop. But what I'm saying is that's happening on the web now, right?
Yeah.
Like we're doing that now. I mean, there's lots of people doing that. It's just when it goes to broadcast, that falls out because A, no one's paying for it, and B, the curiosity at a creative level hasn't been, paid for or inspired to do so.
Well, and isn't there a value, since we're mapping everything back to currency here, reading the journal this week about TV and advertising, 18 to 25, 17% down from last year watching commercials, right? So if you really want to engage that new audience and you just don't want to be like doing the 50 to dead audience, there's a value in talking to that audience through the channels they're actually activated on right now. And that's why I feel that engaged earned media is super, super important, because that's going to dial in that younger audience where the type of stuff that you're creating can really resonate.
The other thing is, on the consumer side, since you do take media with you on your phone, from the music stuff I used to do, we've learned that when people fall in love with an artist or a piece of content, they want to interact with it more than once a week. And they certainly want to interact with it more than 13 times in a year. And so TV sort of built on that model. But with musicians, when musicians started becoming popular, we would instruct them to actually step into the social media, very aggressively and program constantly, to the point where the consumer felt a closeness. So that the artist is in their pocket. They could pop it out. They could see what that artist is doing. Now, the same sort of thing happens with TV. People feel very connected to TV. Lost is a great example. Mad Men. There's lots of conversations happening about a television product. And there's a missed opportunity. I think we're repeating ourselves, but we could be programming that missed opportunity more aggressively and really getting a captured audience. And what leads me to believe that brands need to create more ways to create friends, fans, and followers than just pure, viewers that are going to occasionally watch an ad.
Yeah, and I don't think to your point, I don't think it's the network's fault about why there are all these, everything's getting disrupted. I think, which is different than the music industry, because I think it was the label's fault. But but in this case, it's kind of the ecosystem's fault. So there is a dependence and addiction to impressions, GRPs, and audience. And the reason why television CPMs don't go down is because there is a scarcity of ways in which to reach people synchronously. So people, for the most part, are still watching television, especially in like event programming like X Factor and live sports and things like that. They're watching it all at the same time. But once you get to an asynchronous viewing experience, it's a lot harder to sell that audience. In anything other than almost like an aggregate ad network, like CBS Audience Network.
But it shifts. I mean, I know it's really early, but it shifts with like what Zuckerberg just talked about with the open graph. That you can actually start creating really broad-based synchronized viewing experiences.
Right. But you buy that media differently, you run creative in that media differently, and it's not just, again, just about empty space, it's about integration and emotion and getting people to take action, and those are things that the current salesperson, media buyer, automaton doesn't really deliver on. That's why a lot of that is moving to kind of demand-side platforms and automated media buying to get that audience at scale, and having the real integration left up to highly paid specialists, which obviously has slimmer profit margins, which isn't good for some businesses. On both sides of it, the people paying them and the people taking their money.
It's easier, like when I was selling media for my previous company, it was a lot easier for me just to go, instead of coming in with a big idea, is just say, here's your spots and dots.
Right.
And it was really easy.
Frictionless.
Just to give the money. And that's the bureaucratic inertia that we're facing.
Mm-hmm.
And to your question a minute ago, it's the innovator's dilemma, right? I mean, CBS makes millions and millions, if not billions of dollars, selling spots on their TV shows, and they make great TV shows. They're not going to start worrying about adding, $15 million to the bottom line to create a social story on the side. They don't get bonused on it. So bureaucratic inertia is holding us back a little bit. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not the networks. But I think the aha moment will happen on the web before it pops to the TV.
The networks are definitely incentivized to bundle those audiences. I mean, the electronic rights go across most of those channels. So in terms of adding value for an advertiser, you're trying to make sure that you can extend beyond that viewership. But when it comes to simply marketing that content, there's not much incentive unless there are brands separate from what's supporting them on television to basically invest in building those audiences, knowing that ultimately sustainability, duration, long-term engagement in different ways. I mean, programmers are programming different devices, reflecting the core equities of those individual vehicles, and advertisers should be, and a lot of them do, especially the ones represented here, that are communicating their messages in a way that's actually organic to that platform.
Yeah,
and that's where you get that that synchronous holy grail.
Yeah, and the paradox is that there are a lot more micro interactions than there are macro interactions, but micro interactions tend to fall some ways below the line, and the agencies that service them are sometimes below the line, while the macro, I won't even say interactions, maybe macro consumption, mass media, is still that above the line thing where you get 30-second and 60-second theater from. So it's it's a dilemma, and I think it's less of a dilemma when, and I guess this is the innovator's dilemma, when the status quo is still making a lot of people a lot of money.
Well, and that dilemma is best addressed with, like the way you said it, indigenous to the device, and maybe not totally synchronous to the plot line. So, whether people want to call it transmedia or whatever it is, I don't think the narrative has to parallel the first screen. I think the narrative can go completely awry and down whole other rabbit holes and have whole other lives that could resonate completely differently. And the other thing that you were talking about, how like, you know, the music analogy of like, people don't just know the artist between when they release singles, right? I look at the social heartbeat of a TV show the next day, and I can tell how serious it was by, you know, the social +3, if you will, where they'll still be doing 20 tweets a minute, you know, 24 hours after it aired, right? And it's still got a clear heartbeat. And that social heartbeat tells me not only, you know, how deep that show went, but, you know, how engaged that audience was.
I want to shift gears for a second and talk a little bit about data. So it's something that's not as sexy as content, but one would argue, and I think David Verkelin, who said a couple years ago at CES on a panel that I was on with him, that data is the new creative. Right? There's this enormous amount of information out there. Everybody's touting, you know, the targeted marketing that Google can do relative to what you search for, which to me is, you know, kind of kid stuff compared to really the way data can be used and should be used. And on the flip side, and I know that, you know, we're talking about connectivity really with TV at the essence, but on the flip side, you know, you have studios spending billions of dollars a year marketing films, and they have no idea who goes and sees those films at the box office. $9 billion in box office, and not one iota of information on who bought a ticket to the point that they can market back to them, right?
The irony is that they made a movie about the exact opposite, which was Moneyball, which is opening this weekend, which is all about using data to make better decisions so you can spend less to make more, which is
well, but
funny.
I'm starting to see studios do smart things like...
Tell us how you feel, Ian.
I'm a big saber.
But again, it's the same bureaucratic inertia, like who owns the film, who's the distributor, you know.
I understand where the system breaks down relative to the exhibitor and Fandango and Movie Phone and all the transactions.
You know who has the data is Netflix. They have a crystal ball, and they can tell you absolutely who's watching what, when, and why, and where.
Right, but how's that getting back?
They didn't use that for their Crickster naming convention,
interesting.
clearly.
We're talking with Netflix on various levels. The thing that's interesting is their big insight is that when Mad Men drops or when Sons of Anarchy drops, funny enough, people don't watch one and wait another week to watch the other one. They watch all 9 or 10, like literally in 2 days. So if anything, it says like consumer demand is high, program more. That's the data. And I could tell you that from other programming initiatives I've done. It's like if you're programming to an audience, they don't want less, they want more.
Well, and that's really smart.
The American way.
Demand-based intelligence.
I mean, I think data, when it's not predictive, when data is real-time intelligence, it allows you to make real-time decisions, but they're not at like a broad stroke. They're like lots of little strokes. And again, that feels like a lot of work. Again, it feels like it takes a lot of people to do it, which means it takes more money to do, which says, you know, I go back to my broad strokes, which is what, you know, generally, which is why they still make movie marketing decisions based upon, you know, awareness and then maybe a little bit of intent, like a top 2 box kind of thing. It's amazing that.
And they cast movies. They say this guy's in the movie because he does great overseas, and that's what the numbers are. So there is data going on, but they don't have a CRM system. You're absolutely
right, and that's because they use the data for risk aversion.
Right, risk aversion. Yeah,
right.
not for.
And that's probably smart. I don't know. I want every studio mailing me every time they put out a release, but I've seen studios schedule their screenings through demand-based intelligence. I.e., you know, we worked with one studio that was marketing a pop star film, and they scheduled all their screenings based on the largest volume of conversation in those markets. So I think it's, you know, the challenge that Ian put out there is like it's not easy to listen and act real time, but you know, you can start leveraging that data in unique ways.
So let's go a layer below that though in terms of the data and how that data is being used by the brand. I mean, could you argue that moving forward across platform, a brand commits itself to a 30-second spot to drive awareness. The relationship with the Mad Men goes online. The individual clicks through to that, and there's a direct relationship like Mad Men had with Unilever in terms of those Madvertorials that they did this past season.
Yep.
The individual clicks on that. There's intent there because they're interested in something from that brand. They download the coupon. They take the coupon on the mobile phone to the store. They check out. They get their tub of Vaseline with a 50% off coupon. And AMC, in theory, should get a VIG off of that because they drove them all the way down for the conversion. Now AMC now owns that relationship with that audience, which is built off that Madman property, which is their brand or part of their brand set, right? And can continue to exploit that in a way that advertisers are getting more value out of the content by mining that data.
So
is there a network out there that has data capability?
I don't think I think the data is all out there, but the connection between those data points isn't. So this entire industry will get turned on its head once the average person is making a purchase using a mobile payment. So once they can track, and that's why there's a lot of talk about the ID wars, like around your Facebook ID or Google ID or Twitter ID being your primary identifier or unique identifier, because what that will do is that will take some kind of digital engagement, and that will start kind of in the old world, we'd call that like a cookie, right? Like it would start the breadcrumb trail all the way through to a purchase. There's a breakdown in terms of data from redemption, and that's why couponing is such a big important thing for marketers, because it's so highly attributable. Yep. But once you're actually following the path from literally like some kind of engagement or even a friend referral to a purchase at a brick and mortar location, because it's tied back to the same ID that you were logged into using that initial experience with, then you'll be able to appropriate those dollars better, because you know how far they traveled and how accountable they were. And that's maybe a couple years off.
But the real names thing that you cite, everyone goes to the social graphs first, the social networks first, but the people in the pole position for that are Apple and Amazon, who everyone already started with their real names and already have their credit cards. So that coupled with the mobile scenario you painted is the win.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, think that your Apple ID, Twitter is baked into the new Apple OS, iOS,
yep.
iOS 5. So your Twitter ID is connected to your Apple ID. So in theory, they can target advertising. They're not doing this yet, but they can target advertising through their iAds platform based upon the kinds of things you talk about on Twitter or things that you do when you're logged in with your Twitter ID. But they've also got your credit card number attached to the Apple ID, which is attached to your Twitter ID. So you can see where that kind of manifest destiny is going. And I think the other guys, Facebook is doing the same thing with Facebook credits. Everyone's got that clear path towards closing that.
But the data is getting better, which will close that gap between the measurement tools on the brand side, being able to evaluate, platforms and devices outside of television and just your standard fare. But then also through some of the, Adobe and Omniture and those revenue per like factors, and being able to connect the POS systems. You're able to at least get a better sense of the impact that those communications are having, especially for certain categories. It's not always going to work for every single category, but when you can get that trail all the way into a purchase and then build off of those, you're going to at least be able to generate some behavioral data and some insights that you probably didn't get before, because the standard metrics from Facebook Analytics and Google Analytics only take you so far, and being able to actually tie it all together in where you couldn't necessarily before, will give you a better platform from a brand point of view to actually drive campaigns off of that versus insight campaign and then hoping that it ultimately results in a transaction.
Doug, your use case is interesting. I would argue that it's not AMC. It'd be better if the sales channel becomes Mad Men. So if Mad Men production team or producers have this sort of ownership, they should be they're curating great style and clothing in there. They should be actually the ones that are actually getting rewarded for that relationship with the audience, because they're actually really building the audience. And so if they're actually curating this clothing and then actually having a site that says, here's where to go get it, then they should retain that audience for the duration of that series. And in AMC, no one really sort of says, I'm an AMC fan. They say they're a Mad Men fan.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's kind of weird because, just thinking about this now for some reason, AMC doesn't, because they don't own Mad Men, they're not responsible for marketing the brand. They're responsible for marketing that particular production in the particular time slot that they're selling ads up against.
Sounds like the labels back in the day.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay, we have time for one question. Oh, one or two questions, I'm told.
We want people to be able to challenge remarks.
Awesome.
There you go.
What if I have two questions? No.
Sorry.
I'm interested.
Let us know who you are.
I'm Abby. I work with Doug at Ogilvy Entertainment. Full disclosure. I have a question on the role of social influencers, because I think we hear a lot about them, but maybe you could give us examples of how you've used them in different case studies, and also for the validity of something like clout. I heard a lot about it, but they say I'm an expert on New Zealand right now, so I think it's very beta. So how do you feel about those kind of things?
I'm just quickly going to jump in on clout and say, from a consumer experience, because I'm always talking about social television, I got an offer the other day on clout to watch a new show on CW, and it wasn't exactly up my alley. It was something about a doctor, a young girl in the Midwest, but I took the offer just because as a marketer I should really dig into what you're talking about. Next thing I know, I'm at work watching this show while I'm working on my computer, and I'm deeply sucked into it. Next thing I know, I'm like already looking it up on my DVR and record and setting my record because I want to watch it. And it's so, it's on demo that I like TV, but so off demo that it's really not what I'd be necessarily into. But it actually got me to the purchase funnel, if you will, or the tune-in funnel. And we partner with Cloud on some of the stuff we do from the monitoring side. And I do think that, influence is still being baked out and it needs a finer point on the pencil, but I do think it's an interesting way to be turned on.
Yeah, I think there are two kinds of influencers. There's like above the line influencers, which is the kind of people that people aspire to be like in general, and classify them as celebrities, right? So those celebrities do certain things, like certain things, advocate certain things, and people will pick up on that and emulate that. Then I think you've got below the line influencers, which are more, I guess, kind of like what clout is trying to democratize, which is experts on particular topics, and whether they're doing a good job on that or not is another story. But experts on that have an audience, because I think it comes down to respecting consumers as potential media channels, right? And so if you are an expert at a topic and a certain audience looks to you for expertise on that topic, then yeah, that is a measure of influence, and we are always working on both of those things. There's again, those above the line influencers, below the line influencers, and there are times when below the line influencers actually wield more influence, proper influence, than the above the line guys. Only because the above the line guys tend to have bigger audiences, but they're also more passive. The below the line influencers may actually be active members of a community, where when they walk into it, they get recognized, not for who they are, but for what they know.
And they might be a little bit more authentic because they don't got $8 against it.
Yeah. We used below the line influencers for Levi's Curve ID jeans. We got some crazy RFP. It was a really small amount. We wanted to go for it. They were going to use it to buy banner ads, and we were like, please don't use banner ads. So we took the banner ad money and we did social influencer videos, and we dropped them on the internet. And it was driving, it drove 52,000 comments on the 18 videos, and drove 84% of the traffic to their Facebook page to actually get size for the jean. And in store, we brought 4 influencers as 4 different markets. Each influencer brought 400 people to the store, nice. And each store was up about $4,500, and it sort of got nominated for an OMA award. So we actually are like really believers of it. And when we put the sort of stat 52,000 comments, 1.9 million views against your banner ad, it's like you don't get comments on banner ads. I mean, we had 972 shares. No one shares the banner ad. So if you do it right and you do it very, very, in the below the line influencer, I think it really, really works.
I think above the line influencers are those are I guess we call those endorsement deals. Yep. Which are very inauthentic by nature. Yep. So it's a little different.
Or prostitution.
Yeah.
Any other questions? There's one right here, sir.
Wait. Our streamers can't hear.
Okay. This is a little bit more esoteric, but if the advertisers aren't going to pay additional money, they have their budget once you've got a show out, and you have this whole other piece of creative that you need to do and you need to create. Are you getting additional money from advertising on those digital sites, whether it's a microsite for the show or whether is advertising being sold there too, or is it just really to drive more business back to the show? Because you already got the market you already have the viewers from the show who are being driven to the site, who are now being driven back to the show, or can you monetize that site as well with advertising, additional advertising? Is anybody doing that?
That should work that way. In our work that we've done historically with AMC, sales and marketing are very I mean, they're synergy meetings. Which doesn't necessarily mean they're synergies, it just means they're synergy meetings. You know, and they get together, and, you know, certainly the marketing materials, right. They're marketing materials that, you know they can be marketing or sales opportunities as well. So when we built this Mad Men Yourself thing, you know, for AMC, and it took off and it exploded, you know, Advertiser actually came to AMC first, even though we proposed selling it. Advertiser came to AMC first, 8 o'clock coffee, right? And they said, oh, we want to sponsor that. Okay, done. We don't even know how much to charge for that,
right.
But we will. But now they, you know, it was Banana Republic last year and probably again this year. So, you know, they resell that, and then they in turn repackage that in international markets, and believe me, that what we built for them puts them way in the black on that investment. They don't necessarily see it that way, I don't think. I wish I saw it that way from the beginning, so we can negotiate into our contract that we get a piece of the money that would make, except they would never have hired us. I mean, entertainment companies are not necessarily known for sharing, shaving off points off the gross to the agencies.
Yeah, we don't like doing that.
Yeah, right. So, you know, so that's an issue. But I do think there's a lot of potential, obviously, for ad-supported networks to be doing those kinds of things, because it's going to be impossible for them to incubate all of that creative work or product development ideas in-house, and they're going to have to find other ways to diversify their revenue.
But if there's an audience, and you can package it, and you can ultimately get to a value proposition that works for an advertiser, quite often that'll produce better returns, longer term engagement in a way that you may not even be able to afford that television spot. So there are instances of that happening, and I think that is a very valuable way to get incremental revenue from an existing audience. But again, you have to invest in building that audience.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, we conclude. I thank everybody for coming, and those of you online, stay tuned for the next panel.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, gentlemen.